digitaljamsessions.com. Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam special. Today we're joined by Joe from Yuki and Sam from Rainfall Films, and we have Dave Cook from
Digitas LBA.
Welcome back, guys, and thanks for joining me on this behind the scenes style additional show, because I wanted to just explore the notion of this wonderful group of geeks that we have right here, right now. And first of all, I wanted to talk to you, Joe. I just have to ask you, do you have an Altruist? Because if you don't, we must get you one. We must get you. No, I don't. So these Altruists are these lovely new wearables. They're jewelry. You'll love them. They're very you. They're jewelry, and they can be, it's actually a little stone that has Bluetooth technology in it, but that stone can be interchanged between different sets of jewelry. So a ring, a bracelet, and a necklace. That's very high fashion. And basically what it does is it connects to your mobile phone and it filters out all of the various things that are going on with your phone. So you can filter by keywords or by specific people or by time of day or whatever that thing might be.
Nice.
So that you don't actually have to look at your phone when it's buzzing like crazy and people are trying to call you or send you emails. You don't actually have to look at the phone. You just respond when your ring or your necklace or your bracelet vibrates at you.
I mean, I have a Pebble watch, which I really love, and I'm resisting getting an Apple Watch until the battery's better. And this is the biggest bloody problem, is battery power, because, you know, even connecting my Pebble to my phone, my Bluetooth just runs my battery down, and then I have to carry more technology. I have 2 now batteries that I carry around in my handbag, which is now had to expand into a rucksack. You know, so we need to crack the power generation problem.
Okay,
solar panels, dynamos, all of that.
I do hear that somebody's working on a piece of an energy form where it's by the motion of walking. So the more you walk, the more it recharges your things. But I don't know how long that's going to be before it actually reaches us. But I'm curious now, because you've talked about the technology and the devices, and we're equally balanced here, 2 girls to 2 boys. I want to find out who has the most technology on a day-to-day basis. Who is carrying the most screens around with them? Come on, Sam, own up. How many screens do you carry?
Oh boy. Well, I guess on the usual basis 2. I'll have my phone and I'll have my tablet. I have a little carrying case thing for the tablet, but I'm also really, really curious about the Apple Watch. I mean, I think probably most people want to see what this looks like in 2 to 3 generations. It's probably going to be amazing.
Yeah. I refuse to put it on my wrist until it gets better, but that's just me.
Yeah. I'm not a watch wearer. I've never, ever worn watches, but I would if this thing was incredible. And I hate looking at my phone. I hate having to take it out to see who's texting or calling or, address books or calendars. And yeah, give me something wearable. I don't care. I mean, if you make an amazing earring, I'll wear an earring. I will pierce my ear and start doing that if it can do these amazing things.
But it's interesting that you say this, that you don't want to take out your phone and look at the screen to see who's calling, what the message is or whatever. But it still sounds to me that we've actually become at a point in history and at a point as a race where we have become so dependent on the technology in our pockets that we're actually at that stage where it's like, actually, I don't want to pull it out of my pocket. I just want something to tell me what's going on. And when we think about the fact that actually, if we compare ourselves to where we were like a decade ago or, 15 years ago, and you showed your 15 years ago self the technology that you're walking around with now, they would be looking at you as if you had just stepped out of Star Trek or Star Wars or something. They'd be looking at you going...
Mine wouldn't. Mine totally wouldn't.
Well, the trick is to show them that and then show them WALL-E and say, this could be where we're going. So we can't just be off our feet completely and reliant on these screens. There has to be some kind of way to stay healthy, both mentally and physically, while being reliant on technology.
This brings me to an interesting point, because actually, of all the people on this call, Dave, this is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway, but you are probably in the best place physically, geolocation-wise, to actually maintain a balance of your life in terms of health and the technology, the work, etc., because of the place where you live. I mean, Joe and I are in London and then Sam's in LA, and there is a lot of a difference in the culture in these kind of hubs of culture, if you like, in terms of the way that people's attitudes are towards technology or the things that we consume. And I'm curious from your perspective, do you think there is a significant difference to the way that perhaps people who are slightly further afield from these central hubs operate and utilise technology in their lives?
It's funny, actually. Like within the last 5 years, I can safely say there has been a massive boom in like gym culture and walking groups and like taking a hike up Arthur's Seat or to the Pentlands. Like that whole culture, especially where I work. There's just loads of marketing agencies with lots of really healthy looking people walking around with beards and big glasses. I'm one of them. They just totally overtake the gym at lunchtimes and in the evenings. I don't know. There's certainly something there. There's a lot of lovely, it's a very green city, Edinburgh, isn't it? I mean, there's plenty of like trails and stuff you can do. It's fantastic.
There's actually the greenness though within the city. You can see the greenness. You can't do that in London necessarily. Not unless you're in the very posh parts of London.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, you can. It's such. I mean, if anyone listening has never been to Edinburgh, I implore you to do it, because you walk right down our high street and there's a giant castle on top of a giant clock, surrounded by gardens, and there's like a massive hill range just in the middle of the city centre. It's just incredible.
Rub it in, Dave. Rub it in.
Sorry, Sam.
Sorry, what do you have there, Sam? You have a beach, don't you? I mean,
there's a beach somewhere. I think I saw a tree once.
Do you know what? Every time I've been to LA, I've not managed to make it to the beach yet. People keep on telling me there is a beach there. I don't believe them. I've yet to see it, but
well, when you get there, it's filled with people, so it's hard to actually see the beach.
Okay, so I am curious because I do get the sense that especially Joe, who you're keeping it really under wraps, but I think that we probably have some really, really avid gamers and sci-fi geeks and fans here in this group. Please correct me if I am wrong.
You're not wrong.
No correction needed. No.
Okay, jolly good. So I am curious as to what you think is the most interesting piece of sci-fi that you have seen of recent kind of, years, months, whatever. What has been most interesting or most kind of appealed to you recently that you've seen that you've just kind of thought they've really got that right? And the one for me, I'm just going to start and throw this out on the table to kind of get the conversation started. For me, it was Ex Machina, because I felt like it was very, very close sci-fi. It was cutting edge sci-fi rather than this kind of really fuzzy sci-fi that you're kind of having to connect dots in order to really believe it. Sorry, has everybody here seen Ex Machina?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so the majority of us know what it's about. But
yeah,
this notion of the machine's desire to be free and the confusion that young man had in terms of understanding the scope of what she was capable of learning brings me back to where we are right now. Is actually not that far away. When I look at how we're using things like Amy, which you've all managed to experience thanks to the joys of scheduling, that notion that machines are becoming an integral part of our lives without us necessarily realising they're becoming an integral part of our lives is quite interesting to me.
But this is the great thing about sci-fi, is that it always reflects the sort of slight worry that society has with any sort of technological advance or any political movement. The best fiction or sci-fi fiction is always just reflecting the present. It's a cliche to say that. And I think we are at that stage where humans are, and particularly, I might be controversial here. I don't know if I should be.
Do it, spit it out.
Particularly men, maybe, because there's this kind of societal trend about a lot of men feeling emasculated and women taking on, more roles out. We're more of an equal society, and that sometimes is reflected in this. They need an other to feel threatened by, and certainly if you saw Her.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was just completely distracted by the high-waisted trousers made of really thick material. But that sort of, I don't know, just seemed to, I don't know, I'm not I'm no longer a cultural theorist, an academic, unfortunately. But, to me, there's always that thing about sci-fi that always reflects that slight worry that humans have. But particularly, I think there's something interesting going on around gender and society at the moment, which kind of filters through to sci-fi.
Interesting.
Have you seen,
Absolutely.
Channel 4?
Sorry?
Humans.
Have you seen Humans on Channel 4?
Yes.
Yeah, it lost me. I was waiting for something kind of to happen. Like after 4 episodes, I'm like, okay.
It was interesting though, the whole bit about what was it, the young daughter, Matty, saying what's the point in going to school and learning a skill, because all the synthetics can do all these jobs anyway and they don't get tired and they don't need paid for it, so I have no future. And that got me thinking, like, are we? I mean, I'm certain people, the powers that be would not let the world get to that point. But it's certainly interesting, making everything automated and putting people out of work.
It's interesting that you bring this up, because actually we had the creators of Amy. Sorry for anybody listening. Amy is an artificial intelligence. She schedules meetings for you via email. She's not an app. She's just in your emails. And
why is she?
There is a he version called Andrew, but for some reason I ended up with Amy because I'm in the beta and Amy's the beta. But the thing I found really interesting is when Dennis was on the show, he was on last week's episode, and he was talking about this notion that actually it is his very strong belief that actually the future for AI and for virtual he calls them virtual agents. And in his view, it is this shift that we're kind of heading towards, is that we will have virtual agents who will take over a large proportion of these very menial tasks that we as human beings shouldn't be wasting our time with. And, he was talking about a future where we see things like Siri or, whichever, operating program you use of choice, being able to utilize people like Amy. So you would say, Siri, tell Amy to book my meeting with Sam in 3 weeks' time. Or Siri, I want to go and see Joe face to face, make sure that we've got some time aside. And actually you're doing everything through these virtual assistants, and it's removing a certain degree of the kind of minuscule and minor tasks that we spend a lot of time in the corporate world, certainly in the first world problems, doing. But does that lead us to this point of apathy? Does that lead us to this point that we actually sit around twiddling our thumbs and become very bored with life and say, you know what, I have no hopes or ambitions, just as Matty in Humans says? Or is it something that actually we become more of a Star Trek generation that says, you know what, we have this wonderful opportunity to free ourselves from the bonds of culture and society that we're kind of chained to right now, and that we now have the freedom to go and explore and solve these world problems that we just haven't bothered getting around to before? I'm curious.
That's what Clay Shirky's book, Cognitive Surplus, was about a few years ago. So, we live in a highly connected age, and I mean, we must be careful about sort of our cultural perspective and interpreting some tasks as menial, when in fact they're very important to people,
yes.
to other people, and provide livelihoods. But he sort of argues in Cognitive Surplus about where that extra sort of free time that is freed up by having an increasingly connected society where these menial tasks can be taken by something else. How do we use that constructively for creative acts rather than other acts? And there's no guarantee, because we're humans, that we're going to do good with that cognitive surplus.
Exactly.
We may end up doing bad with that. And I was, it's all about the unintended consequences of tech, and how humans ultimately, as the unpredictable yet highly predictable species we are, how that plays out. I was part in 1999. I was asked to be part of this. It was called London 2020 Vision, something like that. And it was supposed to be, and it was in 1999, and it was published in 2000.
Yes.
And so I was part of this. We had to keep going down to London from Newcastle every kind of month or so. And it was really interesting, because we had this, it was our job to come up with this, how we think London is going to be, how life in London will be in 2020, 20 years from hence. And we talked a lot about bespokes and tailoring services, personalised services. And then we sort of toyed around with teleporting. We thought, so is teleporting going to be here or not, do we think? and actually the sort of the conclusion we arrived at was that even if it is, we have to really highly regulate it, because it means that people are just going to get really obese and lazy. And then that has a massive, impact on society and healthcare and all these kind of. And it actually just blows your mind. The whole lot just blows your mind.
There is a lot of consequences around a lot of this new technology and the future that we talk of. There is actually a lot of consequence to a lot of that. I'm curious, actually, Sam, from your perspective as a filmmaker, if you ever feel that there is a kind of a sense of responsibility in the way that you illustrate or articulate some of these futures. Because I know that your thing is sci-fi. I know that you like to kind of, illustrate sci-fi.
Sure. I mean, sci-fi, fantasy, it's all good. What interests me, I mean, what I see now and again is that, I mean, I'm, for all intents and purposes, a hermit. I love just being on my own, away from things. I would be totally happy living in a cave somewhere if I had a good Wi-Fi signal. And but at the same time, like, I will prefer talking and interacting with a person rather than an AI or a automated telephone system. I think because of that unpredictability, it's weird and it's creepy when you are encountering something that doesn't have emotion and can't cognitively respond to you the way that a human being would. And I don't know. I mean, looking at what we have now, whether it's Amy, whether it's Siri, whether it's Cortana, and you're right, Joe, they're all female.
Less threatening, maybe? I don't know.
Put women back in their box.
Joe, you're just going to cause so much trouble for this.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's all good. Sorry, Sam. Go ahead.
I mean, I don't really want to talk to some digital assistant named Bruno. It just, that would just seem very weird. But I don't know. I think, it's with the film industry, with everything going on. I mean, I loved the movie Her. I think it really was able to shine a light onto the idea of artificial intelligence in a way that maybe we were all thinking, but no one was really saying. And that shows us a future where, I don't know, I still think no matter how much of a hermit you are, like myself, you're still going to want to interact with humans, and you're still going to want to get that human touch on things, because it makes the world feel a little bit more real and less robotic in a bad way.
But you know what? It's interesting you say this, and because we're speaking about Her, I'm going to kind of throw this into the pot here, as a point of discussion. But I do think that there is a certain degree of distance that we have kind of cultivated, if you like, as a society from each other. You sit on a public transport nowadays, and I don't know, but I'm pretty sure it's the same in LA as it is in London, or Edinburgh for that matter. If you sit on a public transport, whether it's a bus, a tube, or whatever, and you look at the people around you, and assuming you have a signal, a phone signal, all of them will be sitting there on their phone completely ignoring each other. I have seen people sat next to each other in a room and actually text each other rather than talk to each other.
But why is that bad? We have this this sort of leftover cultural bias about any communication through anything that isn't face to face. And actually, that cultural bias will shed with the next generation. But we have this sort of screen bias, as if any communication through the screen isn't somehow as authentic or as kind of socially connected or as close as a relationship, not via a screen, which, as we know through loads and loads of stories, and I've got tons of them in my own personal life. It's completely nonsense and insane. And actually,
I was going to say, in a way that it can be more social. I mean, as opposed to sitting on a subway and reading a newspaper or reading a book, you could be texting with someone, you could be calling someone, and that's more social than reading a newspaper.
Do you know, it brings me back to, and Joe, I get the feeling you're going to agree with me hugely on this, and Dave, you might also have something to say on this, but there is this notion that, certainly in the early 1990s, early kind of 2000s, it was considered as a bit of a frowned upon notion that people would get into a chat room and they would talk to each other and they would have these deep personal relationships. And it's kind of the same in the games communities as well, that these people would play games with each other and they would actually form these really deep, meaningful bonds that went way beyond your average acquaintanceship or friendship that people would have in face-to-face interactions. And I think that perhaps was the tipping point at which things started to become, you started to see these online dating services and what have you. Because actually it became acknowledged that you could have a deep personal relationship with somebody who you'd never met. But I think there was a certain stigma around that at the time, in the early 90s, early 2000s. And maybe that's kind of gone away a little bit more. And I think maybe her was a representation of just how far we've come in our attitude towards that kind of digital relationship. What's the sentiment on that?
I mean, absolutely. When I was doing my research as an undergrad, I wanted to do my undergrad dissertation on internet cafes and treated them as this liminal space where public, private. And I was laughed out the room by my supervisor at the time. This was in about 1994, 95, because she didn't believe me that people were talking to each other through computers. And there was this thing called IRC, and she just didn't believe me. And I persevered, and I did it in the end and did my PhD in the end. But at the time, also, there was this very dominant narrative that, because I was a geographer, and I actually did geography at Edinburgh. And so I was very much of the Enlightenment school of thinking. That's my philosophy of geography. It was all about cultural space and how people make place out of space. And so for me, it was a natural kind of progression to look at online spaces. But, it really was, at the time, this narrative that geography doesn't matter. Well, geography does actually matter because it influences your culture and who you are, your situatedness. But also there was narrative from Sherry Turkle and to an extent Howard Rheingold about virtual communities being about like-mindedness and like-minded people. And in fact, that isn't true. Sort of communities and social relationships weren't at all. There might have been a common object or, stuff that you kind of aggregated around and started to chat around.
Yeah, like a common interest.
Yeah, it turned into this kind of perception that all online communities were just people who said the same thing and thought the same thing, which is totally a fallacy as well.
This is very true. Dave, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've got so there's 2 points really. The first one is I have never actually met in person the bust artist, Chris. We have never actually met in person. Yeah,
okay.
So when I was writing for a website called VG247, it's part of the Eurogamer network. Chris is quite an active user on their boards, and I think he just came across a few of my articles and, by extension, found me on Twitter and said, I think maybe I forget, it was a long time ago now, but I think he maybe said, "Oh, cool article," or or probably disagreed with me actually, because that's what always happens when you're a games writer. You always get disagreed with. But I mean, we just got chatting, and one day I had this idea for this comic, and then I needed an artist, and I didn't have a clue what I was doing. This is long before the Kickstarter, and he just sort of put his hand up on Twitter and went, I do comics, I do comic art, and I think just through that, we had been chatting for a while, and we got to know each other better on Skype, and then we added each other on Facebook, and we just clicked. He liked the script, I liked his influences, I loved his art. And now we're like really good friends and great colleagues. We work really well off each other,
And yet you have never met.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, he'll tell me if bits of my new scripts stink. I can be quite open with him about his art, and there's no bad feelings at all. We just get on with it, and we're trying to get him up for one of the incoming conventions. But he's got a family down south, so he can't always spend the time coming up. But the other thing really is. I wrote a series of articles actually about Second Life on VG247. It was for the 10-year anniversary. So I spent a good few months. I mean, nowhere near to the level that you guys obviously had experienced it, but actually speaking with a private forum of users who were very wary at first about me interviewing them and speaking with them about their past 10 years of memories and experiences, because they said to me, journalists always kind of paint us in a really bad light. They think we're shut-ins. We think we actually have no life beyond Second Life, which obviously that's not what I was actually keen to get the actual story behind it. And I tell you, some of those stories were actually just incredible. Just that these people had become friends for so long, over so many years, and again, had never met. When the user behind an avatar, an avatar dies in real life, that has a real profound impact on their friends, and they will hold respectful services for each other when this happens. And there was people who had actually had proper in life relationships via meeting in Second Life as well, and it was just great to actually be able to, without any sort of preconceptions or bias whatsoever, just actually do a series of articles about these very real stories. I mean, I'm barely writing in the articles at all. It's mostly just these accounts, these great stories of friendship and love and loss. And I just love that sort of thing. I think Joe mentioned that you would like to see more big social spaces like this or online and in digital. I completely agree. It's like when you see complete strangers in Minecraft collaborating to build a big castle or something. They've actually put that time and they've worked together despite never having any prior interaction.
It's interesting that you're saying this, though, because I do think that it's much more common than people perceive or think in the games community, at least, that people do have very deep and meaningful relationships. And there's a lot of couples that get together as a result of gaming, possibly far more than through dating websites.
My wife and I met online.
There you go. You see? Yeah. And Kimmy is a beautiful, wonderful woman, I might add. And I do think that there is this subculture, perhaps, as some people might refer to it as, that really does exist within the games community, in the games world, of people who play these games do genuinely become family, do genuinely become deeply entrenched with each other. And when we hear these stories about people getting married because they met in a game or whatever, and the mainstream media picks it up and makes a big thing of it, and it sometimes can be a bit patronising about that kind of thing. But the reality is this happens all the time. And you're absolutely right, Dave, when you say that when somebody dies in one of these communities in real life, it does have a very, very deep impact on the people who play these games. And I have known in some games for memorial walls to be created by developers to actually remember those players for the perpetuity of the game environment, so that anybody who has played with them will always be able to go somewhere where they can remember that player. And I do think there is actually a very deep, complex, emotional relationship that occurs that a lot of people who aren't into gaming or don't really get involved with gaming don't necessarily understand quite how deep those relationships and those interactions go. And it's not something that a lot of people will necessarily see as, some people will look at it and kind of go, oh, that's a bit weird, isn't it? They don't know each other, but they care about each other so much. And yet these people are probably more genuine than some of the people that we classify in our day-to-day lives as friends.
But they know more about each other, and they've got that sort of contract of trust because you're fighting together or you're relying on each other to perform various different bits of what they have to do as part of a raid or, whatever it might be. And it is this word loyalty. And that goes between the developer and the audience, the community, but also, within the community itself. And again, the mainstream media will really tend to focus on where you see sort of abusive language being used or, people being bullied through online games, which it's kind of part. It's not part of the culture, but it's a different kind of culture.
It's part of the environment. It's part of the world, and the mainstream media tend to focus on the antisocial behaviour rather than the social behaviour. Absolutely,
and in any studies that they report on as well around games and how it impacts behaviour or influences behaviour, it's always about the any potential negative bits rather than the positive social bits.
Which you can tie you can draw parallels between almost any of those and with any things that are considered more socially popular, like sports or politics. Like
exactly,
these same social interactions happen. They're just on a different level. They're in a different genre.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm going to throw this one out there again. I've referred to it in the past, but I'm going to refer to it again, is the work by Professor Jane McGonigal, who did that really interesting piece of work where, to summarise, and I apologise profusely, Professor McGonigal, that I'm going to rip this to describe it really badly. But basically, the concept and notion that actually we spend a certain period of our lives in education, in formal education, because by the end of that period of our lives, between the age of 6 to 16, we will fundamentally learn enough to be useful to society when we graduate. And that's why we go through education, is to become useful to society, get a job, and actually contribute to society at the end of that period. And her thesis was very much around the basis that we spend an equal amount of time, if not more, during the same period of our lives, between the age of 6 to 16, actually playing computer games or games of some sort. And therefore, what are games actually teaching us or educating us to become or to do? Because they must be teaching us something if we're spending that volume of time engaged with them. And her research basically showed that what we're doing is we're creating a generation of problem solvers, people who will understand when they walk into a room of people how to assess and identify the needs that they have in terms of when they speak to these people, to identify what kind of people they are and to assess their resourcing needs quickly, but also how to move on quickly, how to be adaptable to the situation, because basically they're used to this notion of quest. They're used to the notion of saying, you know what, I need these different types of categories of players, and I need to be able to accomplish my objective and my goal. And if I fail, I'm going to try again. I'm going to keep on trying until we get it right. And that was quite interesting in terms of a live experiential show. Which one is it? It's actually for Battlefront. I think it was for the launch of Battlefront. They did a live experiential show where you went and you basically had to go in and case out this underground drug dealer's den and break in and steal some data and then get out and rescue the prisoner, all that kind of thing. But it was all live experiential. You actually got to do it in person. And it was really interesting because what they did was they invited a lot of fans, a lot of gaming fans, to come and do this thing because there was a monetary prize at the end of it. So it was proper, you know, league tables, etc. And what they noticed, there were two different types of players that played this game. There were some who treated it literally as if it was a live theatre show that they were going to experience. But then there were other players who actually treated it like a game environment. And there was a particular point in the show where you were basically hiding in what was an air duct, essentially. But then you had to go into the environment and kind of dodge the guards and you know, case the office and get the disc out of the office. And there was one particular group who just did not leave this event. They sent 2 people out of the vent and they went off and was kind of exploring, but the rest of the group stayed inside the vent and wouldn't move. And they were there for about 20 minutes and the experience only lasted for about an hour. And the organisers were getting a bit worried. They're like, what should we do? Should we smoke them out? Because they need to move on or they're going to fail. And all of a sudden, after about 30 or 40 minutes of these people just kind of, you know, 2 people casing the joint and the other 6 guys staying in the vent, these 2 people came back and they all kind of did a little huddle. And then they went out there, they completed the entire thing in 10 minutes. Because they had treated it like a gaming mission. They'd said, okay, we're going to send out 2 scouts. They're going to go. They're going to get the information. We're going to have a plan. Everybody will know what their job is. We'll go. We'll do it. Execute. Job done. And they were the most successful team because they had
they were GTA players.
But that was interesting in terms of that realization of the theory, which is actually that, yes, we are creating a generation of people who very much do approach problems in a very particular way. And I wonder if that isn't in part responsible for this kind of emerging entrepreneurial generation that we have.
I think the emerging entrepreneurial generation might be something to do with just the way that they're seeing my generation and the previous generations before, just messing up society. That's actually entirely separate, but it's not really. But I think I love Jane McGonigal's work. I think it's incredibly powerful. And I love Erik Zimmerman's work on this. So he wrote the manifesto for Ludic Century. And I truly believe there's always have done that gaming literacy is the way to understand the world. And actually games for me are the perfect way to understand systems thinking. And as soon as you understand the way that systems work, because we live in systems, society is a system, biology is a system, everything is sort of systems driven as far as I'm concerned. You know, and they have rules and inputs and outputs and consequences. And as soon as you can understand how different systems work, you can understand, you get literacy about them, you can understand how to change them, how to modify them, how to make them better, how to fix them. And I truly think that no matter what subject you choose to study at school or at university level, if you choose that route, if you have a foundation in understanding computational thinking, you don't need to be able to code, but you need to understand systems, you need to be systems literate and understand the fundamental principles that underpin programming, which is problem solving, which is, you know, logic, which is algorithms, then you're set for life.
I reckon this, you know, the whole, we talk about entrepreneurial spirit. I think certainly this generation, it was a big sea change actually within the games media, where you know, a big publisher, I think it was EA was the one, they were doing some sort of press event for a Battlefield DLC of some kind, and it was amazing to actually see that 50% of the crowd were game journalists in either print press or online. The other half were YouTubers. Young kids, you know, guys and girls who had a YouTube channel and had tens of, if not hundreds of thousands of subscribers, just because they were doing what they loved. They were just streaming the game that they were knowledgeable about, very good at, and could speak to other passionate fans in terms they understand. And now that's interesting. I mean, it seems to me now that, going back to Kickstarter as well, actually, we now have these routes to market. I mean, a lot of walls have been torn down. Of course, new walls have gone up in their place. But we're living at a time now, I think, where young people can turn their passion has currency almost. Mm-hmm. If they are super into a topic and they could talk about it on end to the point where they're and we see this in the blogging community as well. You can start a blog on something, say it's like first-person shooters, or even more specifically, Battlefield. And if you accompany that with your YouTube channel and you get involved with the community, you actually become a leading voice in that community. You can make a living off of that. Like, you seriously can. I'm sure like lots of people know the YouTuber PewDiePie. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fan of the guy, but he made, I think, something like...
I love him!
He's passionate, but it's just that voice. I can't listen to it. But anyway, but he turned something like 7 million this year or last year. That's incredible. I mean, a lot of people gave him flack for it, but hey, he's
living the dream. He's
living the dream. He's
documenting
his passion, and I am firmly behind that. I actually wrote a piece about his last year's milestone, whichever that had 3 million I think it was, and I got like so much abuse online because of that. It was basically like, oh, you're advocating this guy who we all hate. Oh, you're such a loser. And I'm like, yeah, but he's done it. Don't be sore at the guy. You know, he's.
I think it's such a shame because no one ever, it's like salaries. You know, people don't, apart from bankers, we never sort of criticize other people's salaries. It seems to be a private thing. Yet when you're in the public eye or in YouTube's eye, it seems okay to criticize someone. And I think it's really because they realize that actually it's their attention that's been monetized. And I think that's going to be interesting as a kind of thing to watch when teenagers, young people, next generation starts to demand that games makers actually or film companies actually pay me to watch your thing, play your game.
Oh boy!
The YouTubers, certainly the gaming space, hold so much power now. They really do, because I mean, games obviously are a moving medium, right? I mean, and it's kind of funny sometimes to watch some outlets just play. I mean, not funny as in I find it humorous. Really, it's just kind of strange to see them playing catch up now with the YouTubers, and they have just crept under the radar almost, and a lot of outlets just didn't see it coming. I think it's maybe because they thought just that. Oh, it's a kid in his bedroom talking about games. Who really cares? I mean, we're like a respected, known media outlet. Those days are over. They really are. You know, they need to improve their video offering and content offering, and some of them are doing it really well. So, it's actually a lot like when newspapers started going digital, and The Guardian spent a lot of money and a lot of time getting a good offering, and then there was all this like fear talk about, oh, the .com bubble will burst, it's all going to be over. You know, you're idiots if you're spending this much money on online. And they were so far ahead of everyone else who did it kind of half-assed. So they really can't sit still on this, like the media outlets in the game space. They need to sort of wisen up. And of course, we've seen, I mean, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One now have Twitch inbuilt, which I think is phenomenal. That is such a clever thing to do, because hey, you know, everyone's streaming the games. That's free advertising for publishers. Essentially, people get to be casters. Everyone can do this now at the touch of a button.
Well, I think big companies are worried about that. I think big companies, big corporations are going through a time of upheaval and concern, because if the prime voice to the audience in the past has been more major websites like IGN or GameSpot, that's a more professional relationship that they can talk back and forth with. They can sell ad space, do what they need to do. But when you have those individual voices like PewDiePie or Jim Sterling, then it's much more of a unpredictable scenario, and you can get away with a lot less bullshit.
But it's them feeling threatened again, isn't it? You know, because it's undermining their traditional, very established ad-funded business models.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's very scary to big companies. And but I think that's in the end, it's good for the consumer, and it's good for the individual, and hopefully makes for better products.
It's interesting though, because when we look at things like Comic-Con, I'm just going to kind of bring it back to Comic-Con again. But it is a good thermometer in terms of where we are in terms of people's perceptions of things. And one of the major subdivisions of Comic-Con in London, at least, is the VidFest. And VidFest is a whole convention unto itself that operates and exists within Comic-Con. And it is purely for video content creators, YouTube content creators, and they sit there and they have booths and they sign autographs and they have people queuing up to come and sit and listen to their panels in exactly the same way as the Comic-Con structure works. And it is a thriving show that happens within the actual Comic-Con itself. And so when you look at how popular these individuals are and how many people are just kind of taking it and saying, you know what, I can do this. I've got a mobile phone. I can just record and do this myself. There is this whole generation of people who are coming up behind these traditional outlets, and it's going to be an interesting time when we get to that tipping point and these individuals actually outnumber and out-influence the traditional outlets. It's going to be an interesting time.
It definitely is. I think, like, I mean, certainly in games, I've had a lot of people come up to me at shows and even just online saying, hey, you know, how do you become a games journalist? And I really have no easy answer for them. I'm like, well, I just opened up my laptop one day and started writing. Like that really is it. Like, you have the tools already to actually make a start. It's just getting through the gatekeepers of the industry. Like, if you want to work for someone like IGN, that's obviously quite tough, right? You actually need to try and get a proper job with them, or one route might be you just become an outstanding member of their forums and you get noticed by one of the mods, and then you can sort of go up that way or become a community manager or something like that. But I always just say to people, look, just start writing. It doesn't matter where it is, if it's on your own blog, a small site that doesn't pay you anything, as hard as that can be. I mean, yeah, you do have to sort of pay your dues, you know, by doing some free work. Sometimes, you know, there are ways to get around that. But Patreon, for example, you could do that's becoming quite popular with game content creators, actually. But, you know, just get your work written, actually put it on paper or whatever, to camera, you know, whatever your format of choice is, and just make something. And keep on making something until sound it out, you know, is it really for you, you know, whatever. And just, you have to immerse yourself in these communities, you know. If you want to be a YouTuber, get yourself known within that community. Even go to VidFest, you know, like go to these events. There must be, you know, certainly in comics, there are like meetups here in Edinburgh that I've gone to. I've just started speaking to people online and just asking the right kind of questions. I mean, the routes to market are there. As impossible as it can seem to make something out of nothing, there's so many tools out there to make it happen.
And that really does apply to filmmaking as well. I'm sure Sam would probably say the same thing to somebody, which is get out there and make something. And because nowadays we all have access to technology that can allow us to record and edit video content if we want to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back a number of years, I remember when DV, like digital video, started becoming very prolific, and the film festivals started accepting submissions digitally or on DVD, and I just thought, oh God, I feel so sorry for the people who have to screen all of these, because, you know, normally it was very contained, where you're only going to get considered if your submission was on film or digibeta, which cost a lot of money. And all of a sudden, the floodgates have opened, and everyone with a camcorder, whatever, can submit stuff. And that's just gotten more and more. But in the end, that's a very good thing. However, you just have a lot more offerings to choose from, and you have to find, like, where's the quality, where's the good content. I think YouTube has done a great job in cultivating that. I love a lot of the programs they've done. I love that they've started opening up actual sound stages, like here in LA, down in Playa del Rey. They opened up a gigantic facility with several sound stages and green screen and performance areas. And if you have a certain number of followers, I think it's 10,000, you can go and film there for free.
And they actually have opened up a facility in London to do that too.
That's great. I think that is so fantastic. You know, it blows my mind thinking of having resources like that when I was just starting to get into filmmaking. I still think you need a good education. You need to be able to kind of learn the trade, and maybe that involves school, maybe that involves college, university, maybe it's just education in the field. But one way or the other, yeah, comics, video game making, I think it all applies. Like, you just have so many resources available to you now that makes me very excited about where we're headed.
So, purely as a speculative question, as a hypothetical, if let's take your Wonder Woman short. So for those of the listeners who don't know, Sam and the guys at Rainfall were responsible for the Wonder Woman short that was launched 2 years ago now at Comic-Con, right?
Almost 2 years.
Almost 2 years ago now, and did reasonably well. You got quite a few million hits, if I recall rightly. But I'm curious, if you had been doing this and you had access to those YouTube facilities, what would have been different for you? What would have changed for you? Because I know that you guys did a lot of that out of your own pockets and kind of did all that yourselves.
Yeah, mainly cost, instead of having to pay for the studio space and all that kind of thing. I think it's a really good incentive to all filmmakers of all levels, really. Because I mean, I've gone and shot at those stages now a few times. Some on really small, low budget independent things, and some on like really huge things. And it's kind of cool. It's like seeing, imagine a soundstage on a major studio lot like Universal or Paramount, where anyone can film there, whether you're a huge production or a small production. That seems like where this industry is headed to me.
Okay. Interesting. Well, guys, I'm gonna say thank you so much for agreeing to join us on this rather informal version of a digital jam session and talk with me about all things geeky. But for those of our listeners who was not listening to your previous sessions, I'm going to ask you once again to share with us your relevant social media handle of choice so that they can now proactively stalk you and follow you and hear all about the wonderful things that you do. Sam.
I'll condense it this time. I'll just say rainfall.tv, and you can find us anywhere from there.
Okay, awesome. And Joe?
I am on Twitter as @doctoe, DOCTOE, or one word.
Wonderful. And Dave?
I'm on online at www.bustcomic.com, and you can get me on Twitter at Dave S. Cook.
Awesome. And once again, we thank you all for joining us and listening to us. If you like this content and you want to hear more random conversations like this one, then please do join us, subscribe, review, let us know what you want to hear about. And thanks again for listening. digitaljamsessions.com